A submarine surfaces in the Atlantic. But this isn't just any submarine. Mounted on its deck sits a twin-barrel turret, the same 8-inch guns you'd find on a heavy cruiser. Behind that, a watertight hangar holds a reconnaissance airplane. And below deck, 10 torpedo tubes, loaded with enough firepower to sink a small fleet. This is Surcouf, the largest submarine in the world when she launched, a vessel so heavily armed that even France's allies feared what she might do, and in 1942, she vanished without a trace in the Caribbean Sea, taking 130 men and one of history's boldest naval experiments to the bottom. The treaty loophole. The 1920s were a strange time for naval warfare. World War I had just ended. Nations were broke. Battleship construction had spiraled into an arms race nobody could afford. So in 1922, the major powers signed the Washington Naval Treaty, a deal that capped the size and armament of capital ships and cruisers. But here's what they missed: submarines. The treaty said nothing about submarine armament. It was a blind spot, an oversight. And France saw an opportunity. French naval planners had a problem. Their surface fleet couldn't match Britain's Royal Navy or challenge American naval power, but they had extensive colonial holdings, territories in Africa, the Caribbean, Southeast Asia, and thousands of miles of shipping lanes to protect. They needed a weapon that could patrol vast ocean distances, hunt enemy commerce, and fight surface ships if necessary. Something that combined the stealth of a submarine with the firepower of a cruiser. So they designed Surcouf. The concept was radical: a submarine that could dive like a U-boat but surface and fight like a warship. A vessel that could stalk convoys underwater, then rise up and shell merchant ships from beyond visual range. A boat that carried its own scout plane to spot targets over the horizon. When the keel was laid in 1927, nothing like it existed. By the time she was launched in 1929, she displaced over 2,800 tons surfaced, making her the largest submarine in the world. She stretched 361 feet long. Her pressure hull was reinforced to handle the weight of that massive gun turret. Her diesel engines could push her at 18 knots on the surface and 10 knots submerged. But it was the armament that made her terrifying. Forward of the conning tower sat a pressure-tight twin turret mounting two 203mm guns, the same caliber as the main battery on a treaty heavy cruiser. These weren't small deck guns for sinking fishing boats. These were full-size naval rifles with a maximum range of 16 miles. Each gun had 60 rounds in the ready magazine and could fire 5 to 6 rounds per minute under ideal conditions. The turret itself was a marvel of engineering. It had to be watertight enough to survive a dive, yet mechanically complex enough to train and elevate like a surface ship's turret. The French pulled it off, but with limitations. The turret couldn't be trained if the boat rolled more than 8 degrees, which meant rough seas severely limited its effectiveness. Then there was the aircraft. Aft of the conning tower, a watertight hangar held a Besson MB-411 observation float plane. The plane could be launched by catapult, fly reconnaissance missions, spot for the main guns, and then be recovered by crane. In theory, this gave Surcouf over-the-horizon targeting capability, something no other submarine possessed. And if the guns and plane weren't enough, she carried 10 torpedo tubes, 4 550mm tubes in the bow with 6 reloads, 2 trainable triple mounts aft, one with 550mm tubes, one with 400mm tubes, giving her the ability to fire torpedoes in almost any direction. 14 reloads total. For close defense, she mounted 2 37mm anti-aircraft guns and 4 13.2mm machine guns. On paper, Surcouf was a nightmare. A submarine that could engage targets at cruiser ranges, scout with her own aircraft, and unleash a devastating torpedo spread if things got close. She was designed to operate independently for months, raiding commerce lanes far from home waters. But then came the 1930 London Naval Treaty. This time the major powers closed the submarine loophole. The treaty limited submarines to 2,000 tons and restricted armament to 6.1-inch guns, 155 millimeters, significantly smaller than Surcouf's 8-inch rifles. France negotiated an exemption. Surcouf was already under construction, they argued. She was a one-off experimental design. They promised not to build any more like her. The treaty powers agreed. Surcouf was grandfathered in. She became the only submarine cruiser of her kind, a legal anomaly, a political compromise, and a vessel that would never have sisters. Beautiful but impractical. Surcouf was commissioned in 1934 after years of trials and modifications. She looked impressive. Photographs show a massive boat with a distinctive profile, the gun turret jutting forward, the aircraft hangar rising behind the conning tower, the complex superstructure bristling with antennas and AA guns. But the crew quickly discovered the gap between theory and reality. The main guns were powerful, but using them was complicated. To fire accurately, Surcouf had to surface completely. The turret needed stable seas, anything more than an 8-degree roll, and it couldn't train properly. The ready magazines held only 14 rounds per gun before needing to be reloaded, which meant pauses in sustained fire. And there was no radar. This was the 1930s. Fire control depended on visual observation. At night or in poor visibility, the guns were nearly useless. The fall of shot had to be observed to correct aim, which meant daylight operations or relying on the float plane for spotting. Speaking of the float plane, launching and recovering it was a nightmare. The process required calm seas, a surfaced submarine, and a crew exposed on deck for extended periods. The plane had to be pulled from the hangar, assembled, fueled, and launched by catapult. After the mission, it landed alongside the boat and was hoisted aboard by crane, disassembled, and stowed. In wartime conditions, with enemy aircraft or warships nearby, this was borderline suicidal. The aircraft itself was fragile. The Besson MB-411 was a small, single-engine float plane with limited range and no defensive armament. It could scout and spot, but it couldn't defend itself. And maintaining a functional aircraft on a submarine, dealing with saltwater corrosion, limited maintenance facilities, and the constant motion of the boat proved incredibly difficult. Then there was the fundamental problem. To use her most powerful weapons, Surcouf had to surface. Submarines survive by staying hidden. The moment Surcouf surfaced to use her guns or launch her plane, she became a large, slow-moving target. Her size, an advantage for range and armament, became a liability. She was bigger than most destroyers, easier to spot, and far less maneuverable on the surface. If caught by enemy aircraft or warships while surfaced, she was in serious trouble. Her AA guns were light. Her armor was non-existent. Submarines don't have armor plating like surface ships. A few well-placed shells or bombs could cripple her before she could dive, and diving took time. A standard fleet submarine could crash dive in 30 to 45 seconds. Surcouf, with her complex superstructure, open gun turret, and aircraft hangar, took longer. Every second on the surface was a risk. French naval officers began to realize what they'd built: a jack-of-all-trades, master of none. She was too large and complex to operate like a standard attack submarine, too vulnerable to fight like a surface cruiser, too dependent on ideal conditions to use her most impressive weapons effectively. One French officer described her as beautiful, but impractical. Another called her a magnificent failure, but the world didn't know that yet. To foreign navies, Surcouf looked terrifying. The rogue submarine. When World War II broke out in September 1939, Surcouf was in the middle of a refit. France fell to Germany in June 1940. The armistice split the French fleet. Some ships joined the Free French forces under Charles de Gaulle. Others remained under Vichy control, technically neutral, but aligned with Germany. Britain faced a nightmare scenario. The powerful French fleet falling into German hands. On July 3, 1940, the Royal Navy launched Operation Catapult, a series of attacks and seizures targeting French warships in British and French colonial ports. At Mers el-Kébir in Algeria, British battleships opened fire on their former allies, killing over 1,200 French sailors. In Plymouth, England, the Royal Navy executed Operation Grasp, the seizure of French ships in British ports. Surcouf was docked in Plymouth. British boarding parties stormed the submarine. The French crew resisted. In the chaos, Surcouf's gunnery officer and medical officer opened fire with pistols, killing 3 Royal Navy sailors. The British eventually secured the boat, but the incident left deep scars. British officers didn't trust Surcouf or her crew. The submarine had killed Royal Navy personnel. She was heavily armed, and now she was technically part of the Free French Forces, a faction the British supported but didn't fully control. Surcouf joined the Free French Naval Forces, but suspicion followed her everywhere. When she operated out of Bermuda and New London, Connecticut, American and British intelligence officers worried she might go rogue. The fear wasn't irrational. Surcouf was the most heavily armed submarine in the Atlantic, commanded by French officers whose loyalties were uncertain. What if she defected to Vichy? What if she attacked Allied convoys? What if she sailed to French territories in the Caribbean and used her guns to threaten shipping or even the Panama Canal? These weren't idle concerns. Vichy France controlled Martinique and Guadeloupe in the Caribbean. The islands were close to major shipping lanes and the canal. A rogue submarine with cruiser guns and a long-range aircraft could wreak havoc. Then came the Saint-Pierre and Miquelon affair. In December 1941, Free French forces, supported by Surcouf, seized the tiny islands of Saint-Pierre and Miquelon off the coast of Newfoundland. The islands were Vichy-controlled, and the Free French wanted to prevent them from being used as a base for German intelligence or U-boat operations. The operation succeeded, but it infuriated the United States. Washington had been trying to maintain diplomatic relations with Vichy France. The unauthorized seizure of French territory by Free French forces, backed by a submarine operating out of Allied ports, was seen as piracy. Secretary of State Cordell Hull publicly condemned the action. President Franklin Roosevelt reportedly threatened to send the battleship USS Arkansas to forcibly remove Surcouf from the North Atlantic. The incident reinforced the perception of Surcouf as a political wildcard, a powerful, semi-independent asset that couldn't be fully controlled. Rumors spread. Some claimed Surcouf was secretly refueling German U-boats off the U.S. East Coast. Others said her crew was planning to defect. Intelligence officers tracked her movements obsessively. None of the rumors were true. Archival records show Surcouf remained loyal to the Free French and conducted legitimate operations. But the legend persisted. She was feared not just as a weapon, but as a symbol of uncertainty. A heavily armed submarine, whose true intentions were unknown, vanished. In February 1942, Surcouf received new orders. She was to leave Bermuda, transit the Panama Canal, and sail to the Pacific. Her destination, New Caledonia, where she would join Free French forces defending the colony against potential Japanese attack. On February 12, 1942, Surcouf departed Bermuda with a crew of 130 men. She never arrived. On the night of February 18th to 19th, 1942, Surcouf vanished in the Caribbean Sea near the coordinates 10 degrees 40 minutes north, 79 degrees 32 minutes west, roughly between Panama and Jamaica. No distress signal was sent. No wreckage was found. No survivors were recovered. The official explanation came quickly: collision with the American freighter Thomson Likes. The Thomson Likes reported hitting a submerged object in that area on the night of February 18th. The impact was severe enough to damage the freighter's bow. U.S. and British naval inquiries concluded that the object was most likely Surcouf and that the collision had sunk her. But the explanation raised questions. Why was Surcouf submerged in a known shipping lane at night? Standard procedure for submarines transiting friendly waters was to surface and display navigation lights to avoid exactly this kind of accident. Why was no distress signal sent? Even if the collision was catastrophic, Surcouf had multiple radio sets and emergency buoys designed to release automatically if the boat sank. And why has no wreck ever been found? The Caribbean Sea in that area is deep, but not impossibly so. Modern sonar and deep-sea exploration technology should have located a 2,800-ton submarine by now. Alternative theories emerged. Some suggested friendly fire, that Allied aircraft mistook Surcouf for a German U-boat and attacked her. The Caribbean was a hotbed of U-boat activity in early 1942. American and British patrol planes were on high alert. A large submarine surfacing at night could easily be misidentified. Others pointed to internal explosion. Surcouf carried a massive load of torpedoes, ammunition, and diesel fuel. A fire or mechanical failure could have triggered a catastrophic explosion. Then there's the sabotage theory. French accounts mention that witnesses reported hearing 2 explosions as Surcouf sank, not the single impact you'd expect from a collision. This led to speculation that limpet mines had been attached to her hull while she was docked in Bermuda. Who would sabotage her? The most common theory points to British or American intelligence. The reasoning goes like this. Surcouf was a political liability. She was heavily armed, difficult to control, and commanded by French officers whose ultimate loyalty was uncertain. The Saint-Pierre and Miquelon affair had embarrassed Washington. Roosevelt had threatened to use force against her. What if intelligence officers decided the risk was too great? What if they planted explosives to ensure Surcouf never reached the Pacific, or worse, never had the chance to defect or go rogue? There's no hard evidence for this theory, but the lack of wreckage, the absence of a distress signal, and the reports of multiple explosions keep it alive. One historian summarized it this way: no conclusive evidence has ever surfaced, leaving its fate as one of the great naval enigmas of World War II. Surcouf's disappearance added a final layer to her legend, a mysterious end for a mysterious boat. The concept that died. Surcouf was supposed to be the first of a new class of submarine cruisers. France had planned to build more. Other nations watched with interest. Japan experimented with large submarines carrying aircraft. Britain had built the M-class submarines in World War I, mounting a single 12-inch gun on a submarine hull. But by the time Surcouf vanished, the concept was already dead. Technology and tactics had moved on. The rise of radar and long-range patrol aircraft made surface operations suicidal for submarines. A large submarine like Surcouf, surfacing to use her guns or launch her plane, would be detected and attacked within minutes. Advances in torpedo technology made submerged attacks more effective. Torpedoes became faster, more reliable, and more powerful. There was no need to surface and risk a gun duel when you could sink a target from underwater. And the strategic role of submarines shifted. World War II proved that submarines were most effective as stealthy hunters, stalking convoys, attacking from ambush, and disappearing before escorts could respond. The submarine cruiser concept, surfacing to fight like a warship, was fundamentally flawed. Surcouf's complexity was also a problem. She required a larger crew than standard submarines, 130 men compared to 50 or 60 for a typical fleet boat. She was more expensive to build and maintain. Her mechanical systems were more prone to failure. In short, she was a dead end. No major navy built anything like her after World War II. Even Japan's I-400 class submarines, larger than Surcouf and designed to carry 3 aircraft each, were aircraft carriers, not gun-armed cruisers. They launched planes to attack targets, but they didn't mount heavy guns for surface combat. The modern equivalent of the submarine cruiser is the guided missile submarine, boats like the Ohio-class SSGNs, which carry 154 Tomahawk cruise missiles. These submarines achieve the firepower of a cruiser while remaining submerged, using vertical launch systems and advanced sensors. They're everything Surcouf tried to be, but without the fatal flaw of having to surface to fight. Why Surcouf still matters. So why does Surcouf still fascinate us nearly 80 years after she vanished? Because she represents the boldest what-if in submarine history. What if submarines could fight like surface warships? What if they could carry their own aircraft? What if they could dominate sea lanes not through stealth alone, but through overwhelming firepower? Surcouf was the ultimate attempt to answer those questions. She was a submarine with cruiser guns, a reconnaissance plane, and a torpedo battery that could sink a convoy. She was designed to terrorize enemy shipping and fight surface escorts on equal terms. In theory, she was unstoppable. In practice, she was a beautiful failure. Too complex, too vulnerable, too dependent on ideal conditions that rarely existed in wartime. But the ambition behind her design is what makes her unique. France looked at the limitations of submarine warfare and said, what if we just ignored those limitations? They built a boat that shouldn't have existed, that violated every principle of submarine design, that tried to be two different types of warship at once. And for a brief moment, she was the most heavily armed submarine in the world. Her name came from Robert Surcouf, a French privateer who terrorized British shipping during the Napoleonic Wars. The Royal Navy hated him. He captured dozens of British merchant ships and even defeated Royal Navy warships in single combat. The submarine Surcouf carried that legacy, a vessel designed to raid, to terrorize, to strike from the shadows and disappear. But unlike her namesake, she never got the chance to prove herself. She spent most of her career under suspicion, feared by allies as much as enemies. She participated in one minor operation, the seizure of Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, and then vanished on her way to the Pacific. We'll never know what she could have accomplished. We'll never know if her guns could have sunk a convoy, if her aircraft could have spotted enemy fleets, if her torpedoes could have turned the tide of a battle. All we have is the legend, the largest submarine in the world, armed like a cruiser, carrying her own airplane, and lost without a trace in the Caribbean Sea. Surcouf was a gamble that didn't pay off, a radical experiment that revealed the limits of submarine design, a weapon so unique that no one ever tried to build another one like her. But she proved something important, that the most terrifying weapons aren't always the most effective ones. Sometimes the boldest ideas are the ones that fail, and sometimes the failures are more interesting than the successes. Surcouf failed because she tried to do too much, but in trying, she pushed the boundaries of what a submarine could be. She forced navies to rethink their assumptions. She inspired new designs, even if those designs went in completely different directions. And she left us with a mystery that may never be solved. Somewhere in the Caribbean Sea, 130 men and the most unique submarine ever built rest on the ocean floor. The wreck has never been found. The cause of her loss has never been confirmed. Surcouf remains what she always was, a vessel that terrified everyone who encountered her, even when no one was quite sure what she was capable of. Now that you know the story of history's most unique submarine, you need to understand the vessel that replaced the submarine cruiser concept entirely, the modern guided missile submarine. These boats carry more firepower than Surcouf ever dreamed of, but they never have to surface to use it. We are committed to releasing 3 videos a week. Like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon.